We killed ISIS leader al-Baghdadi. They've been looking for him for a long time. He was a sick and depraved man, and now he's dead.
So there's a lot of incoming fire. So these guys are using RPGs, trying to push the ISIS fighters further back.
And you feel like that's justified to execute someone?
It's the whole issue of collateral damage.
عال عليهم بنصر وفتح ومكن لهم بعد سنين طويلة من الجهاد.
He died like a dog. He died like a coward. He was whimpering, screaming, and crying. And frankly, I think it's something that should be brought out.
The leader of the Islamic State, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, evaded anti-terrorism operations for years. Until Saturday, October 26, 2019, when a special forces unit killed Baghdadi beneath a compound in northwest Syria. After U.S. intelligence pinpointed Baghdadi's location near the village of Barisha, Delta Force troops arrived in helicopters for the nighttime raid.
Everyone's a little nervous. No matter how many times you rehearse, no matter how realistic your preparation has been, you know that no plan completely survives execution. You know conditions on the target will always be somewhat different from what you prepared and trained for. And perhaps most importantly, you find yourself in a conversation with yourself about how determined you are not to let your comrades down.
As Trump tells it, Baghdadi fled into a network of underground tunnels before a military robot and dog cornered him in a dead end. That's when the leader detonated his suicide vest, killing himself and 2 children, and collapsing the tunnel. This isn't the first time Baghdadi has been reported dead.
Лидер так называемого исламского государства Абу Бакр аль-Багдади убит.
The U.S. is investigating reports from Russia that one of its airstrikes may have killed the leader of ISIS.
But this time, there's proof. On-site DNA tests confirm the identity of the remains U.S. forces found in the rubble. And ISIS confirmed Baghdadi's death 5 days later. Troops combed the site for intelligence before U.S. fighter jets destroyed the structure. Vice News spoke to villagers who hid in their homes during the attack.
ما صار الانفجارات الشديدة جينا لهون شفنا البيت مدمر على كامل. البيت يبلغ مساحته حوالي 400 متر. جثث أطفال ونساء متواجدة عند مدخل البوابة. أشلاء متواجدة عن مكان التفجير حوالي 200 متر. يعني منظر ما عد علينا اطلاقا. تفاجأ الصبحيات انه بيقولوا ان البغدادي كان متواجد عندنا هون في القريه. يعني والعالم لحد الان ما هي مصدقه هذه الروايه، لان بشكل عام القريه عندنا ما فيها اي مقر لاي فصيل او فيها اي نشاط عسكري هون. يعني وجود البغدادي عندنا هون في المنطقه صار عند الناس حاله من الخوف والهلع إنه تستهدف المنطقة تعتبر مقر لتنظيم الدولة.
The president claimed to have watched the operation live from the White House Situation Room and issued a photo of the moment that at best looks awkwardly staged.
We watched it so clearly.
So how did you watch it?
Well, I don't want to say how, but we had absolutely perfect, as though you were watching a movie. He didn't die a hero, he died a coward.
I understand the attractiveness of calling terrorists cowards. The problem with it is I don't think it does any good, and it's factually inaccurate. I have spent much of my career, along with my other special operations brethren, combating terrorism. So I have no love and I have no affection for terrorists or terrorist leaders like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. I think they are evil and vile people. But one thing they are not is cowards. And I think that the downside of using the word coward is we are inaccurately describing what we are fighting.
The world first learned the name Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in the summer of 2014, when he declared a caliphate.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. وهذا واجب على المسلمين، واجب قد ضيع لقرون. لقد ابتليت بهذه الأمانة، أمانة ثقيلة، فوليت عليكم.
He'd led the Islamic State since 2010. Before that, he was with Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
He argued that it was necessary to establish the caliphate, the Islamic State that followed Sharia law in an orthodox way. And I think, to everybody's amazement, succeeded way beyond anything that could have been expected.
Takbir! Allahu Akbar! Takbir! Allahu Akbar!
Baghdadi was born Ibrahim Awad al-Badri in 1971 to ultra-conservative Sunni parents in central Iraq. Those who knew him before he rose to power say he was a quiet guy who loved studying the Quran.
My view is that Baghdadi was chosen to be a leader of ISIS by the high ranks of ISIS itself rather than the other way around, meaning it was not him who came up with the strategy for ISIS. It was more a case of having someone like him who's very much a believer in extremist views and knows how to speak very well and recite the Quran very well, be a so-called credible figure in the eyes of the people that this organization was trying to attract to it around the world. So basically they created for him this larger-than-life image that a lot of people believed in, and that gave him credibility in the eyes of his supporters as a so-called caliph, the leader of an Islamic state.
There it goes! There it goes!
A year after the US invaded Iraq, he was picked up by American forces and thrown into Camp Bucca, the detention center that became known as the birthplace of ISIS.
A lot of people seem to think that al-Baghdadi was mainly radicalized when he was detained by the United States. However, his radicalization was well before that. He already started expressing extremist views when he was a teenager, and therefore by the time he was captured by the US, he was already very much a well-rounded terrorist.
During his stay, officers reportedly allowed him to move around the facility, resolving disputes amongst the other detainees. 11 months he used to recruit foot soldiers. By 2014, Baghdadi and his fighters had pushed their way into two cities, Mosul in Iraq and Raqqa in Syria.
The thing about Baghdadi and his operation, he understood that in establishing a caliphate, he also had to provide for their needs. And so he established not only a judicial authority for trying them and punishing them, but also an administrative bureaucracy that could tax people and ensure that goods and services flowed within the caliphate.
بإذن الله سنقطف رؤوسكم ونطهر الأرض من رجسكم.
By taking control of territory, he became a very clear target. It was only a matter of time before the caliphate would be destroyed by superior power and superior organization.
Vice News' Seb Walker embedded with the US-backed coalition of Arab and Kurdish fighters as they were battling the remnants of ISIS in northern Syria.
These guys are trying to take out the fighters with 50 caliber machine guns. They've actually had to stop the heavy artillery bombardment because SDF soldiers are now getting so close.
Holdout ISIS fighters, with nothing left to lose, frustrated the forces fighting them on the ground.
خدام زان اف کسی دندر دمانه حمیوانی انتحاری نه حمیوانی اوید جهادیش در وهاتنه اوید خودن شربک نه خود دستیم بکن یعنی اوید یعنی بیرو باوری کی وانی کور آن کور چه بیه د فکری تروریسم ده د فکری داعش ده.
Adnan Afrin, a commander with the Syrian Democratic Forces, had fought ISIS from the beginning.
Do you feel like this is the moment that it's going to be all over?
براستی یعنی مورالك جبروی ما يعني تشتكي من نورمالا يعني تبيجي سيستم كي او قسم مازن دنيا حميله حيربو ونواجه تدبينها سيستم تكدي شيء خرب خلاص دبا طبعا يعني ايش كي ويجي ابو يعني زحمتيه كي ويجي ابو رجاء او فكرنا في سيستم داعش حين رجاء له ايش كان جاي كم تقدر بس من او قسم ملات كوش بربو او قسم انسانات كوشتنا. طبعا اف منطقات قدامك انه الناس ده ترزقار كده اف خونيت في درجه شتاها بون اخردني بده الطياره اللي خست
نعم. What do you know about who's still inside and what kind of preparations they've made for this last stand?
اف انسان انتحاري اكيد هنا هو بحسي انه كان عربت مو هنكري ومويني عرضي هون اكيد هنا بحسي واجي كان تنال اكيد هنا بحسي واجي كان محتمل هناك انسان مدني يجي دايك زاروك الجال خاجر تبن بيجو آگاهی مجی چه به دم پیش و آلان داعشی اف آلان حمی آلان داعشی.
It would take the SDF days just to push the die-hard ISIS fighters a few yards back.
Go. Because you can hear the sniper rounds whistling past. There's a lot of gunfire still. ISIS is very close to this position. There's fighters in there?
Yeah.
Still?
And they have a flag on top of the building.
And they have weapons?
Yes, there are a lot of them.
So they're hitting you with missiles too?
Yeah.
Even now, there's still fighters?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of incoming fire. So these guys are using RPGs to try to push the ISIS fighters further back.
With the caliphate crumbling, thousands of ISIS members and their families streamed out of Baghdad.
In 2014, Raqqa, Syria, was declared the capital of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's caliphate, ISIS's center of power.
بفضل الله جل وعلا تمثل في هذا الزمان حديث النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم.
But 3 years later, after a long and bitter battle with US and coalition forces, ISIS was defeated and driven from the city. A siege that left thousands of combatants and innocent civilians dead in the rubble. Scores of fleeing ISIS fighters were captured and imprisoned by the SDF. Among them, hundreds of Westerners who'd responded to Baghdadi's call and traveled to Syria to join the cause. In the spring of 2018, inside a jail in a secret location in northwest Syria, Vice News' Isabel Young met two of the most infamous prisoners. Alexander Koti and Al-Shafi al-Sheikh formed half of the British ISIS cell nicknamed the Beatles. Suspected of carrying out the torture and execution of hostages, including American journalists James Foley and Stephen Sotloff.
Alexander, the State Department has stated that you likely engaged in the group's executions and exceptionally cruel torture methods, including electric shock and waterboarding. Al-Shafi, they've said about you that you earned a reputation for waterboarding, mock executions and crucifixions while serving as an ISIS jailer.
I really want to know who came up with that.
Do you deny that?
Of course I deny that. What does that mean? Known for crucifixions. Just explain that to me.
What was your role within the Islamic State?
That is something that can be discussed in a legal platform, not here.
Alexander, do you have any regrets over your role that you played within the Islamic State?
I have personal regrets of things I've done within my life entirely, including some things during my time spent in the Islamic State, but none of them are those.
Such as?
Personal things, not things that I would be willing to share.
Beheadings?
No, definitely not. The issue is, so far, you can't build a case on what the media has said. Okay, the media can say we was deputies of the Khalifa, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. They can say many things, but if I don't come out and say that, then there's no way that you can make a case out of that, unless you have someone who's willing to stand on the platform and be a witness against me that, yeah, I was witness, I saw Alexander and I saw so-and-so and so-and-so, and they were X, Y, and Z. But this is something that they obviously don't have. If they did have, I'm sure they would be more than happy to bring us and try us.
Considering the extent of the destruction of Raqqa, the chances of finding any physical evidence are slim. But intelligence agencies consider the duo to be loyal followers of Baghdadi. The group was headed by fellow Brit Mohammed Emwazi, better known as Jihadi John, the masked man who rose to infamy as the English-speaking voice in the Islamic State's brutal execution videos.
So any attempt by you, Obama, to deny the Muslims their rights of living in safety under the Islamic Caliphate will result in the bloodshed of your people.
When it comes to the acts of Mohammed Emwazi, who we know because we've seen in videos, beheading Western journalists like James Foley, do you denounce that?
Like I said, the circumstances to me are unknown of that. All I know is he was a journalist who was beheaded, and there was a reason given by the person who done it. As for the circumstances behind it,
You don't know anything about why you think he was murdered?
the video seems to be self-explanatory.
Exactly.
It says was it a bombing in Mosul Dam, or I think, or Haditha or something like that. It was a warning, I think, to stop the bombings of the Muslims in a certain area, and if you don't, X, Y, and Z will happen. And after that, I see it like a ball rolling.
And you feel like that's
Momentum.
justified to execute someone?
So the whole issue of collateral damage goes back to how you see things, how's your perception of war in the issue of collateral damage, in basically achieving your goal, your objective. Is it acceptable to take the life of an innocent person? Another issue is I took it upon myself that I'm not going to allow any journalist or any press to use me as a dagger to take stabs at the Islamic State, use my words to basically tarnish, if you want to call it. I mean, some might say, well, they're already tarnished, but not with my tongue, you're not going to do it, because what I experienced there in the Islamic State wasn't what is widely broadcasted in Western media. I experienced good times with people. I shared good moments and memorable moments with a lot of people there, and I met some of the best people that I might ever meet. while I was there. Good characters, down-to-earth people. So I won't allow someone to come here and spoil that, trying to, extract from me some condemnation. But at the same time, I'm not gonna justify. If there was any miscarriage of justice, if there was any mistakes made, then just as Shafia said, a mistake remains a mistake, and of course, it's condemnable. As for specifics, I don't know which I can't differentiate between those to go through them case by case with you, but definitely they wouldn't be accepted.
You can understand, though, how upsetting that must be for people who have had so much hurt inflicted on them by the Islamic State, and then to see you sitting here talking about a lack of remorse and talking about the good times you had there.
Yeah, that's just because of their, this comes from a lack of actually knowing the reality. And this is what happens when you observe something from far without actually experiencing it yourself.
Like many other foreign fighters, Koti and al-Sheikh are caught in geopolitical limbo. The British government has stripped them of their citizenship and until recently had refused to take them back to stand trial.
Do you guys have any regrets on coming here to Syria?
No way.
You'd do it all over again?
Come to Syria? Yeah.
Join the Islamic State?
What I do once I come to Syria, I would avoid some things that I did, but I would definitely come to Syria if I had to do it again. Yeah.
The duo was unrepentant and often arrogant during the interview. But in May of 2019, during an interview with ITV, Koti did admit to working with an ISIS cell which dealt with Western hostages.
It was instructed to extract email addresses from them and open communication, basically. Any responses would come back sometimes like proof of life questions, questions that only the prisoner himself would be able to answer.
We have thousands of captured fighters and thousands and tens of thousands of family members. And we did a big favor to a lot of countries, and those countries didn't want to take them back. We were put into this battle, interjected. It was supposed to be a 30-day period, and we've been there for many, many years.
Just weeks before the killing of Baghdadi, an abrupt decision by President Trump destabilized the region.
هربان هربان أمريكا مثل الجردان أمريكا. Fuck American!
3 weeks before Baghdadi was killed, Trump announced he was pulling American troops from northwest Syria.
We, all together, we defeated and took over 100% of the ISIS caliphate.
The sudden withdrawal threw the region into disarray. Kurdish Syrian forces, America's primary allies in the fight against ISIS, immediately began to mobilize to repel the Turkish military just inside the Syrian border. With Kurdish forces distracted, concerns arose that prisons housing ISIS fighters would soon be left unguarded. So the US military took Koti and al-Sheikh into their custody.
We have taken a certain number of ISIS fighters that are particularly bad, and we've wanted to make sure that nothing happened with them with respect to getting out.
When we asked the pair about the possibility of a US withdrawal, their prediction was eerily accurate.
What do you think is at stake for you guys and for the situation at large if the US does leave this region?
Well, I know that by the end of this year, there should be some decision on whether America is going to stay or not. I personally think they're not going to stay, so...
Why?
Why? It's not in their interest. They've gained so little and put up so much effort here. It's pretty sad, actually.
What happens to Syria if the US pulls out?
The Syrian regime will expand. Either it would come to some kind of agreement with Turkey, and that Turkey assumes responsibility over northern Syria, or it could fall into a clash between the two countries. As far as the prisoners are concerned, you're just in limbo and just remain a game in the hands of those who wish to exploit, our presence here. The fact that this is a volatile region, leaves so many possibilities. And like I said, one of them is that, which I'm sure the Americans are considering, is that these prisons could be attacked. They could be attacked by Islamic State in Rimasi forces who attack the prison to free prisoners, which wouldn't be a good look for America. I mean, for many, is that probably a lot of people who, if it is the case that Islamic State overruns these prisons, that possibly many people who possibly left the Islamic State to actually leave the Islamic State might end up going back to where they were before.
Why?
Because that's the only option. Someone's come and opened the door for you and freed you from prison. It's very unlikely you're going to turn your back on that entity.
Do you have any advice for Donald Trump's actions here in Syria in terms of preventing an organization like the Islamic State from returning?
He's got hundreds of advisors to advise him on that. He's not going to get that from me for free.
Koti and al-Sheikh were arrested in eastern Syria, which is where Baghdadi was thought to be hiding. But he was found more than 200 miles away in Idlib province.
It was very good cover. It was, in a sense, hiding in plain sight.
Even when the group was at the height of its power, its territory never stretched as far as Idlib. Instead, the province was a melting pot of jihadist fighters and rival al-Qaeda affiliates, all fighting against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad.
And Baghdadi was a real threat to al-Qaeda because he had been so successful. There was a general assumption that he would not be welcome in areas that were more or less controlled by al-Qaeda. And of course, this is part of the genius of the man, that he went to a place where he would be least suspected of going.
Idlib has become a refuge for the displaced with nowhere else to go, just like Baghdadi. There, he could hide amongst the chaos, while the rest of the province was focused on the danger coming from above.
The worry is that the killing of Baghdadi in Idlib itself, that some people might regard Idlib as a new hub of al-Qaeda or ISIS terrorism, and use this to attack the area without discriminating between who's a hardline al-Qaeda supporter and who's a civilian. The killing of Baghdadi makes the civilians in Idlib vulnerable.
Vice News was in Idlib a month before the raid on Baghdadi's compound, where 6 months' worth of airstrikes from Russian and regime forces has already made life nearly impossible.
So we're just driving through Idlib province, which is the last opposition stronghold in Syria. There is currently a ceasefire in place, but that does not necessarily mean that it's holding.
Not everyone in Idlib is part of a warring militia. There are also around 3 million civilians trapped between a closed Turkish border and President Assad.
We're in one of the largest hospitals in Idlib, and they just have a constant stream of people coming in because over the last couple of days, there's been a number of airstrikes and artillery shelling. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum.
Mustafa's 13. His brother hasn't left his side since he was hit.
بيحب اللعب وهو يعني كان مثلا هو كان عم يلعب بالملعب بالطابي. بعد ما طلع من الملعب بده يروح على المدرسة وهو رايح على المدرسة انضرب.
What injuries has he sustained?
في شظيتين براسه وفي وحدة هون بمعدته. عملوا له فتح بطن وعمليات بالراس ووضعه خطير. الله ما نعرف شيء.
Is he able to communicate?
والله صعب. ما يعني حيواننا معه بس ما في مشكلة يعني معه كان بالدماغ.
Who do you blame for this situation?
بشار الأسد وروسيا على طول ضرب علينا، ما بيهدى على أساس هدني ما في لا هدني ما في شيء.
Russia did call for the latest ceasefire, but previous halts in the fighting have not held, as Assad sees those occupying Idlib as terrorists and has pledged to retake every inch of land back from them.
حرك ايدك هلا شوف ابني حركة سلم ايوه برافو عليك تمام.
Dr. Basal Al-Asfar has worked here since the beginning of the revolution and survived 4 attacks on this hospital.
آخر كان استهداف هذا المشفى ب10 تموز الشهر الماضي لما استهدفوه بطلقات طيارة رشاش.
That must have been terrifying.
كتير مو شوي يعني بلحظة بننسى كل شيء بصفي عنا بس تفكير إنه رح ننجو نحن وهالأشخاص اللي عم نعالجهم ولا لا. شلونك يا حجي؟ كيفك؟ اعطيني ايدك لعندي سلم علي.
The UN tries to protect hospitals in war zones by letting them share their coordinates. But according to an NGO working here, in the span of 5 months, 15 of the medical facilities that shared their locations have been targeted by government or Russian airstrikes and shelling.
متذكرة ايش صار معك ولا مانك متذكرة يا خلاص؟ مانك متذكرة. انت حامل هلا ما هيك؟ خدي نفسي من تمك.
Must be such a heartbreaking and dangerous job to do what you're doing.
أكيد اللي عم تحكيه صح يعني هو عمل كتير خطير. اللي عم بيزيده أكتر هو العبء النفسي اللي عم تحمله. بصراحة رؤية الأطفال خصوصا امبارحة يعني كان في عنا إصابة لطفلة اسمها اسلام صدير على ما أعتقد، انتهت بقذيفة فقط وحيدة أدت لنهايتها. هذا الشيء بخلينا دوما إنه عم نشعر هالأطفال عم تروحي أطفالنا بدون أي مبرر يعني بصراحة، بس لغاية القتل والتهجير فقط ليس إلا.
Islam's family is still living in what was left of their home.
So this is the living area?
والله هون في الصالون، مرتي هون، أمي هون، بنتي هون. ما يعني هون قاعدين هيك حاطين السفر عنا قاعدين هيك.
It's so insane to think that yesterday this was a perfectly livable home. I can't even imagine how you feel stood here.
ايش احساسي؟ احساسي لو كاني ميت اهون، لو كاني انا ميت اهون.
Do you remember the moment that this happened?
ما قاعدين عم ناكل نشرب شاي بعد ما تغدينا، هون الغدا لسه ما جينا ما حسينا درينا نزل صاروخ. بنت صغيرة استشهدت دفناها والباقي كله بالمستشفى. كل الليل للتنتين بالليل عند أبو راحوا جابوني.
Despite losing a home and a daughter, Islam's family can't afford to move anywhere else.
But many other families are leaving.
Raja and her 7 children have survived until now by sheltering under their house.
عنا هون أبو تفضلوا ملجأ تحت الأرض يعني عاملينه. نزلنا والله بالليل، نزلنا المسعلية يعني ما حسنا الليل امبارحة كيف مضيناها ما عرفنا، كتر القصف قذايف.
So this is where you come when there's shelling?
لا في الواحد مركوب يطلع إنه يعني على موضع محل ولا في شيء، وين بدنا نروح؟ نخاف على الأولاد وما في مصاري، ما في الوضع بالمرة يعني طيران يعني خوف مو قليل، أشو صعب الله لا يدوقني إياه الحمد لله. والله امبارح عنا هون يعني اللي تصوبوا بالمعرة بالقذيفة يا روحي والله 4-5 أولاد ماتوا.
In an attempt to save their lives, Raja is now taking her family 60 miles towards the Turkish border to move in with relatives. That's as far as they can go. But it's still in Idlib, and so still in Assad's crosshairs.
How does it feel to be leaving today?
احساسنا والله بده طالعين على الموت، ما حدا خبيث بدش بيته، بس يعني ما بينبرك كمان تحت القصف، يعني الواحد متوازي.
What about your neighbours? Are there any people here who are still left, or has everyone moved?
عنا بالحارة لا ما في، كلنا نازحين، ما في قليل هون عنا، كلنا نازحة، حارتنا هون فاضي ما في. مشان فطومة محمودين ما عليك خليها، قلنا لك يا
As the ceasefire crumbles, the possible annihilation of Idlib looms, which could send another wave of desperate refugees across Syria's borders and beyond, creating the type of power vacuum ISIS has successfully filled in the past.
هذا أبو الإسلام. هذا إسلامي.
This is her grave.
هذا. امبارح كانت عم تلعب معي. يا سوي. لا حول ولا قوة. هاي عند بشار الأسد إرهابي. عم يضرب الحاضنة والأطفال والنساء. هو وبوتين. يوميا فوق 20 طفل أو 30 أو 40 عم يقتلوا. ما عم يقتلوا الإرهابيين، عم يقتلوا نساء وأطفال. والله يا ريت ما ضل عايش، بس مو بإيدي. ايمت بدي موت ما بعرف. وصيتن يحفروا لي هون، أنا هون. بقى ايمت الله بريد. الحمد لله.
The Trump administration is touting the killing of Baghdadi as a major victory in the fight against ISIS.
He's dead. He's dead as a doornail.
But that victory in Syria won't necessarily help the president at home.
Well, I mean, I think the average American knows that ISIS is a threat. I don't think they know Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in particular. They might have seen the videos of him when he mounted that platform in the mosque and announced at the beginning of the caliphate.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
But nowhere near sort of the penetration and the impact that Osama bin Laden had. I mean, I think obviously the president's going to get a well-deserved sort of bump in public opinion based on the success of this raid. That being said, it's hard to know how sticky it'll be.
Public opinion isn't the only thing this raid may or may not help him with. There's also his relationship with the Republican Party.
The killing of Baghdadi does bring people on side. Unclear how long that'll last, so it'll depend on where does the president end up. The classic center of the Republican Party has always had deep concerns with Donald Trump's foreign policy, right? Whether it's his sort of coddling of Russia, his failure to really aggressively support Ukraine. Finally, it went too far, right? Abandoning the Kurds, these people had lost 11,000 lives. It went too far, and you saw almost everybody unanimously rightly criticize the president.
Many of us have been arguing that this was a mistake. It shouldn't have been done, and hoping that he would reverse course. There seems to be no evidence of it so far, but I think it was a mistake.
Was this a policy you can support?
Oh, absolutely not. So this is a big win for Iran and Assad, a big win for ISIS.
It's a mistake of catastrophic proportions. These have permanent effects on both our allies and our enemies. It makes our allies less willing to trust us, and our enemies less afraid of us.
We need to have a say in the future of Syria. Walking away from it and leaving Turkey, Iran, and Russia to decide the future of Syria will in the end make us less safe because we cannot rely on them to protect our interests. If we leave now, there is a greater danger of chaos, destruction, and the resurgence of ISIS.
The group has demonstrated it's able to evolve its methods in the past. As it began to lose territory to the coalition offensive in 2015, it started using guerrilla and insurgent tactics like suicide bombs.
his death will not mean the automatic end of ISIS or the automatic end of the fight against ISIS. And that's because the ISIS ideology is still out there. There are people who sympathize with what ISIS represents and who are looking for an opportunity to form a group like ISIS used to be in its heyday.
There are an estimated 18,000 fighters in Iraq and Syria alone, and sleeper cells throughout both countries. Militant groups in at least 18 countries have pledged their allegiance to ISIS. And in 2019 alone, the group has claimed responsibility for attacks across the world, including in Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, the Philippines, and France. After the death of Baghdadi, the group released an audio message alluding to future plans.
أولا تدركين أميرك أن الدولة اليوم تقف على أعتاب أوروبا ووسط إفريقية، بل هي ممتدة باقية بإذن الله تعالى من المشرق إلى المغرب.
It also announced a new leader, a so far unidentified man whose nom de guerre is Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qurayshi. How the US responds to developments like these will help determine whether ISIS flourishes in the wake of Baghdadi's death.
We have to remember that the key drivers that made people join ISIS in the first place have a lot to do with political and economic and social deprivation. And therefore, the United States should also focus on these key drivers beyond just the security element and who to kill next or fight next after Baghdadi and his affiliates. So ultimately, ISIS was only ever a symptom of the Syrian conflict and its problems rather than a key driver of the conflict.
Most important of all is not to walk away from the challenge of dealing with the remnants of ISIS. We've learnt the hard way what happens when you walk away, as happened when we walked out of Iraq. Now Trump's decision to walk out of northwestern Syria holds the seeds of the same kind of mistake.